Hi, I'm Thalassa. At the will reading, my parents handed my sister the entire $16.9 million company. Me, they slid over a single dollar and a job listing. My mother leaned in and said, "That's where failures belong." I didn't cry, I didn't argue, but when the lawyer paused and said, "There's one final clause, your grandfather's," my mother started screaming. "Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this? And where?" Drop a comment below, because this story, it begins in silence, but it ends with everything. The room smelled like old money and paper, sharp, dry, with a trace of lemon-scented polish clinging to the heavy wood table. A flicker from the chandelier overhead danced across the rim of my sister's pearl earrings and the starched silk of her pale blue blouse. Isolde always dressed like she was auditioning for royalty, and today was no different. She even had that smug little tilt to her chin, like she already knew how the script ended. I sat still in the farthest chair, my back straight but not rigid. The chairs creaked faintly as everyone settled. I could hear the rustle of wool, the scrape of polished soles against the marble floor. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the lawyer clearing his throat. "Per the last will and testament of Charles Whitcomb," he began, unfolding a thick sheaf of cream-colored paper, "dated March 12th of this year." My heart tapped slow, even beats. I kept my gaze fixed on the edge of the table, not on my parents, not on Isolde, who was practically glowing with anticipation. I already knew where this was going. My hands stayed clasped in my lap, except for the thumb stroking the inside of my coat pocket, porcelain, smooth, cool. My grandfather's teacup, the one he'd always asked for even when the staff offered newer ones. I'd taken it this morning. Not to steal, but to remember. That was all I ever had left of him that didn't belong to someone else. The lawyer continued, words thick with practiced solemnity. "To my granddaughter, Isolde Whitcomb, I leave full ownership and operational control of Whitcomb Holdings, valued at $16.9 million, as well as the adjoining properties in Greenwich and Martha's Vineyard." Applause. From my mother, a quiet, pleased clap, just 2 or 3 taps. My father nodded once approvingly. Isolde's smile widened. She looked at me for a beat, and her eyes sparkled the way they used to when she snatched toys from me as a kid and dared me to say something. Then the room shifted. "And to my granddaughter, Thalassa Whitcomb," the lawyer said. The silence was thick. I raised my head slightly. I didn't blink. "I leave $1, he said evenly, "and a printout of a current job posting for a junior administrative assistant at Fairfield County Legal Solutions." There was a pause. Not for dramatic effect, just disbelief, thick and awkward. A single sheet of paper slid across the table. Plain black text. Job title, salary, bullet points. Data entry, customer intake, basic filing. I folded the paper once, then again, neatly, tucked it into my purse. "That's about where failures belong," my mother said softly, not looking at me. Her voice was syrupy sweet, like she wasn't trying to hurt, just telling a bedtime story that happened to end in someone else's humiliation. I didn't speak. My father checked his Rolex. Isolde was grinning behind her manicured hand, trying to act shocked but failing miserably. The room hadn't changed temperature, but my skin had gone cold. Still, I didn't cry, didn't plead. I sat perfectly still, breathing in the oak and betrayal, wondering how we got here, except I already knew. For years, I'd been the quiet one, the one who didn't argue, the one who stayed late with Grandpa when he forgot what day it was, or needed someone to read to him when the lights were too bright, the one who knew how he liked his toast, not burnt, not pale, just that golden shade in between. But none of that mattered now. I adjusted the porcelain cup in my pocket with 2 fingers. It felt heavier somehow. Chairs scraped the floor as people began to stand. My mother reached for her bag. My father turned toward the door. Isolde had already pulled out her phone, probably texting some friend about her victory. The lawyer didn't move. Instead, he cleared his throat again, louder this time. "There's one final clause," he said. The air stilled. My mother stopped mid-zip. Isolde tilted her head, annoyed. "More?" she muttered. The lawyer hesitated for just a breath. Then he reached under the table and pulled out a small sealed envelope. This, he said slowly, was handwritten, notarized, and separate from the formal will. Mr. Whitcomb left specific instructions. He pushed the envelope across the table until it rested directly in front of me. My name was written on it in the shaky, precise script I remembered from his crossword puzzles. To Thalassa, no one else's name, no carbon copy, no explanation. The lawyer looked up, meeting my gaze directly. "Only you," he said, voice clear and level, "are authorized to open this." I didn't move at first. The envelope rested there on the polished wood like it weighed 50 pounds. The seal was deep red wax, pressed with a W, so precise it almost looked angry. I could feel my mother's gaze digging into the side of my face. Isolde let out a sharp breath, more scoff than exhale. But I didn't rush. I placed my fingers gently on the paper and slid it toward me with quiet intention. Then I opened it. My hands trembled slightly. Not from nerves, but from something deeper, more raw. I hadn't seen his handwriting in half a year, not since the note he'd left tucked inside a biography of Churchill. "Read this one last time for me, kid." Now it was back. Slanted and a little shaky, but still him. "If they're reading this without me, I can only hope you remained silent. That's your greatest strength, my dear." My chest tightened. I had stayed silent, through the ceremony, through the thinly veiled insults, through the cheap shot of a $1 inheritance. I'd swallowed it all. His letter went on. "They'll think they've won. Let them. The truth lives quietly until it's ready to roar. There's a key taped to this page. You'll know what to do. East Harbor, Storage Unit 2 of 13. Your future is yours to reclaim." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat and flipped the page. A small silver key, slightly tarnished, was taped to the inside corner. I stared at it for a long second. I was vaguely aware of rustling beside me. My sister leaned in, close enough that I could smell her expensive citrus perfume. "What is it?" she asked, voice low and coated with venom. "Another job listing?" I didn't answer. She leaned even closer. "Whatever that was, it won't matter. You were never meant to lead, Thalassa. Grandpa knew that, he just couldn't say it aloud." I folded the letter carefully. "We'll see." Our mother, not one to let a moment pass without tightening the screws, added from across the room, "He pitied you. You weren't built for business, sweetheart. You always felt too much. That's not a strength in the real world." I gave her a small nod, the kind that lets people think they've had the last word. My fingers curled around the key in my lap. It was warm now, but in my mind, I wasn't sitting in that room anymore. I was 6 months earlier, back on the rooftop garden of the Whitcomb house, the last place Grandpa and I had spoken, just the two of us. It had been one of those crisp October mornings when the air felt clean enough to start over. He was sitting under the old maple, wrapped in that ridiculous cardigan with wooden buttons, sipping weak chamomile tea like it was whiskey. "You ever think about legacy, lass?" he'd asked. I shrugged, brushing leaves off the bench before sitting next to him. "I think about surviving the week. That's enough for me." He chuckled. "Good answer. But legacy ain't just about buildings or bank accounts. It's about who you leave standing when everything else falls." I looked at him. "You mean Isolde?" He turned to me slowly. "I mean integrity. And no, I didn't say her name." He had gone quiet then, watching the breeze sway the branches. Then he said it, words I'd buried until now. "Blood doesn't make family. Integrity does." I remember frowning. "What does that mean?" He sipped his tea again. "It means some wolves wear pearls and silk. You don't bark at wolves, girl. You wait. You strike when they think you're asleep." At the time, I thought he was just rambling. I smiled politely, held his hand, changed the subject. But now, sitting in that sterile office full of paper and silence and cold shoulders, his words echoed like a prophecy. I stood slowly, placing the letter back into its envelope and slipping it into my purse beside the folded job ad. My fingers lingered on the key. Behind me, the lawyer was already gathering documents. My parents were deep in quiet discussion. My sister was pretending to be bored, scrolling her phone. No one looked at me as I walked out. The hallway outside was cooler than the room, brighter, a little too clean, like it had just been scrubbed down to erase any trace of the dead. I stepped outside into the thin spring sunlight. The wind caught the edge of my coat, fluttering it like a flag. In my palm, the key pressed into my skin. I knew exactly where I needed to go. The last time I stood in front of East Harbor's rusted gate, I was 17 and crying. Now, at 36, I was dry-eyed but far from steady. The morning fog clung to everything like grief you couldn't shake. I parked along the cracked curb, the sea air already seeping through the cracked rubber around my window. That sharp scent of salt and rust, it hadn't changed. East Harbor looked exactly as I remembered, weather-beaten metal siding, dented units, faded blue numbers stenciled by hand. It wasn't elegant, but Grandpa had always said, "Places like this keep secrets better than banks." I stepped out, clutching the small silver key he'd left me. The gravel crunched under my boots as I made my way toward the main office. Inside, a middle-aged man sat behind a scratched plastic desk, sipping coffee from a thermos that had probably been around longer than I had. He looked up as I opened the door. "You're Whitcomb's granddaughter, huh?" I blinked. "Yes, Thalassa." He set the cup down. "Thought so. You're the girl with the special claws." I raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" He didn't elaborate, just pulled out a clipboard, passed it to me with a pen. "Your granddad left instructions. Said we weren't to open Unit 213 unless you came in person, with the original key. He called ahead, made it real clear." I signed my name. The pen stuttered a little on the slick paper. Something about hearing Grandpa's voice still reaching into this place, even after he was gone, tightened my chest. He stood and gestured for me to follow. "It's just around the corner. Been locked up tight since October. You sure you're ready for whatever's in there?" "No." But I nodded. The fog followed us down the row. When we reached Unit 213, the metal roll-up door looked like every other one, plain, padlocked, smeared with salt and time. But when I slipped the key into the lock, it turned smoothly. Too smoothly, like someone had oiled it recently. I pulled the door up. Dust motes danced in the gray morning light. The space was small but packed. Stacks of boxes lined one wall, labeled in thick marker, "Thalassa, Private." A file cabinet stood in the corner. On a small desk sat a portable screen, dark and silent. Then the lights flickered on automatically. The screen blinked blue, then played. My grandfather's face appeared, older, thinner, but eyes sharp as ever. He looked straight into the camera like he knew I'd be standing here, alone, on a foggy morning, wondering what the hell I was about to uncover. "If you're watching this," he said, "they've already divided what they think is the empire. Let them." He shifted slightly, then continued. "I didn't build this company for shareholders or show horses. I built it for builders. For people like you. People who work in silence, think with intention, and act with heart. Not greed." I froze. His voice, though weary, carried the weight of every Sunday morning we'd spent in the garden, pruning roses and watching the fog burn off the hills. I left this here because the house is no longer safe. They were circling, watching everything, even me, so I locked away the truth. What you're about to find belongs to you, and you alone. The video ended. I turned toward the boxes, heart pounding. Inside the first, old documents, bound ledgers, USB drives. Each folder bore his handwriting. "Thalassa, owner, do not disclose." My fingers tightened around the edge of one file. Beneath it lay a large envelope sealed with legal wax. I opened it carefully. Inside, notarized documents stamped 6 months before his death. It was a revised deed. He'd quietly transferred ownership of Whitcomb Strategic Holdings, every share, every vote, into an irrevocable trust. For me. But it wasn't unconditional. A typed note attached to the front spelled it out. "This transfer is valid only if Thalassa Whitcomb chooses to walk away from the family voluntarily. She must not contest the will. She must not beg. She must choose integrity over inheritance." I sat down hard on the concrete floor. The cold seeped through my jeans, but I didn't move. My head swam with images, every childhood dinner where I stayed silent while they praised Isolde for things I'd done. Every time my mother said, "You're not strong like her." Every birthday card signed late or forgotten entirely. I used to think I could earn them. Love, pride, even a simple thank you. But now I realized the price of trying. If I accepted this, I'd be choosing a future without them. No more strained calls, no more holiday charades, no more wondering if this time they'd see me. But if I didn't, I'd be choosing them over myself. Again. I let my hand run along the edge of the desk, grounding myself. That's when my phone buzzed. I pulled it out of my coat pocket. One new message, from an unknown number. "You need to see this. The board thinks you forged the will." The sender ID popped up, Isolde's assistant, the one who once told me under his breath, "You're the only decent one in that family." My hands clenched, not from fear, but from the quiet understanding that this was war now. 2 days later, I stood in front of the elevator doors on the 19th floor of Maxwell Thorne headquarters. The polished chrome reflected back a version of me I barely recognized, blazer sharp, hair pinned, eyes clear and unflinching. I'd barely slept, but the exhaustion was buried beneath something steadier. I knew what they were about to do, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to flinch. The boardroom was just past the double-glass doors. The name Whitcomb had been scrubbed from the signage. It now read, Maxwell Thorne Executive Boardroom, as if erasing his name could erase what he left behind. I walked into the boardroom like I wasn't the ghost they'd tried to erase. 12 people sat around the long oak table. Most avoided eye contact. A few shifted papers, glanced at screens. The only one who met my gaze was Bianca, my sister. Her expression flickered between amusement and irritation. "Well," she said smoothly, crossing one leg over the other. "Didn't expect to see you at executive meetings, or anywhere really." I said nothing. Just walked to the head of the table and set down the folder I'd brought, the original deed, the trust documents, and one final sealed envelope I hadn't yet opened. Bianca raised her brow but said nothing. Then Harold, a longtime board member who once told me I was too thoughtful to survive corporate life, cleared his throat and held up a shiny blue folder. "We've reviewed some troubling information," he began carefully. "Your sister's legal team received a sworn statement claiming you manipulated your grandfather, convinced him under questionable emotional pressure to sign over control of his assets." I stared at him. Bianca leaned back, arms folded like she was watching a show she'd already seen. "A witness has come forward," Harold added. "They claim to have seen a distressing interaction between you and Mr. Whitcomb. The language used was, well, coercive. Concerning, at best." For a second, the room spun. Not because I was surprised, but because I'd forgotten just how far Bianca would go. "You're accusing me," I said slowly, "of manipulating a dying man." Bianca's lips curved into something that could have passed for sympathy if you didn't know her. "We all know he loved you. That doesn't mean he was thinking clearly. You'd been gone for years. Then suddenly you show up and 2 weeks later he changes everything?" "I wasn't even in the state when he made the trust official," I replied. "Exactly. He was isolated," she shot back. "No counsel, no oversight. It's suspicious." I turned to the board. "And the lawyer from the will reading? Where is he?" "He notarized the documents himself. You have copies of the timestamps." Harold adjusted his tie. "He's taken a leave of absence. Illness, we're told." Of course he had. They'd orchestrated this, not overnight, but over months, maybe longer, lining up statements, planting doubt, creating a trail that would muddy everything just enough. I glanced at Bianca. She was smiling now. It took everything in me not to lunge into the argument, but I knew better. They were waiting for me to act emotional, to break. Instead, I took a slow breath. And suddenly I was 10 again, standing in our mother's hallway, holding a broken vase I hadn't touched. Bianca had blamed me, of course, said I'd been running. said I knocked it off the table. I remember pleading, "It wasn't me," over and over. But no one believed me. In this family, the loudest liar always wins. Until now. I picked up the sealed envelope and slid it across the table. "What's this?" Harold asked. "A letter," I said calmly. "From Gerald Miles, my grandfather's estate attorney. Notarized, dated, and written in his hand. He anticipated exactly this." Bianca's face twitched. I looked around the table. "You want to play games with inheritance law? Fine. But understand this. Every word you say in this room will be reviewed by outside counsel by noon. You want a war of paperwork? I can play that game better than any of you. But not today." I stood, collected my bag. "You have 48 hours to reconsider this story you're building. Because once I move..." I looked directly at Bianca. "There's no going back." She leaned forward. "You think threatening the board is a good look, Thalassa?" I turned my back to her. That's when her voice followed me, soft but sharp. "You don't scare me. You never did." I didn't turn around, because something stronger than rage had begun to settle in. Clarity. By the time I got back to my apartment, the sun had dipped behind the neighboring buildings, casting long shadows across the narrow hallway. I let myself in, closed the door behind me without turning on the light, and leaned against it for a moment. The quiet felt too loud. Zzz. I slipped off my shoes, dropped my bag by the coat hook, and padded into the living room. My phone buzzed with a text from someone on the board, Mitchell, the only one who hadn't looked away. I didn't open it, just turned the phone over and set it face down on the windowsill. Outside, the streetlights blinked on one by one. I sat on the edge of my small couch, elbows on my knees, and stared at the old photo framed above the bookcase. It was from a Christmas long ago. Me, Bianca, and Granddad in matching flannel pajamas, holding mugs of cocoa. I must have been 8. Bianca had hot chocolate on her chin. I was missing a front tooth. He was laughing. I hadn't wanted revenge. Not really. I just wanted to stop being erased. That's what they'd done, for as long as I could remember. Blotted me out with silence, with cold stares, with well-placed lies that sounded more believable than my truth ever did. And somehow, I kept hoping that if I worked harder, if I was useful enough, quiet enough, maybe they'd see me. Maybe they'd even love me for it. But I should have known. I stood, stretched my legs, and crossed the room to the closet where I kept the older files, Granddad's things I hadn't touched in months. The cardboard box at the bottom was labeled personal, not for business use. His handwriting had always been sharp, almost architectural. I pulled it out, brushing off a layer of dust, and carried it to the coffee table. There were ledgers, notebooks, an old fountain pen he always carried. Tucked in the middle was a small envelope with my name written across it. Not Thalassa, just Lass. I stared at it, unsure if I should even open it. My hands hesitated. Then, slowly, I peeled back the flap. The letter inside was dated exactly 3 months before he passed. The ink was faded slightly at the edges, but it was his voice, unmistakably him. "Lass, if you're reading this, it means they moved faster than I expected. I made arrangements, not just what's in the trust, but protections Bianca doesn't know about. I never told her. I didn't trust her with your name. I've carried guilt for years, for letting your mother turn the house against you, for standing back when they shut you out. You were never less than. I just wasn't brave enough to say it when it mattered. Please forgive me, and don't let them undo what I tried to fix in the end." I reread it 3 times. The words began to blur. Then I dropped the letter. Not dramatically, just let it fall. I didn't cry. Not at first. I just sat there in the quiet, not blinking, not breathing. After a while, I stood and walked into the kitchen. The linoleum was cool under my feet. I opened the fridge. 2 eggs, a jar of mustard, a half-empty bottle of tonic water. Nothing else. It felt like a metaphor. I leaned against the counter, staring at the cracked tile behind the sink. I thought about calling Gerald, the lawyer who had drafted Granddad's will. Maybe he'd still pick up. Maybe Bianca hadn't gotten to him. But what if she had? I didn't know who I could trust anymore. Back in the living room, I caught sight of the small cactus on the windowsill. It had once been a gift from my grandfather. "Even stubborn things deserve a chance," he'd said when he gave it to me. It had lasted nearly 8 years. Lately, I'd forgotten to water it. The soil was cracked. One side of the plant had collapsed inward, curling in on itself. I didn't touch it. I just sat down again and stared at my laptop. The screen glowed softly in the dim room. An open file was still there, a timeline of the trust details, notes I'd made after our last meeting with the legal team. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then, slowly, I moved the cursor to the corner of the screen and clicked delete. One file gone, then another, and another. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was never strong enough. Maybe I was always the girl on the sidelines, watching other people win with prettier lies. I whispered the words, not to anyone, just to the room. Maybe I was never meant to be part of this family. Then, just as I reached to close the lid on the laptop, a small notification popped up in the corner of the screen. Voicemail transcription complete. I blinked. I hadn't remembered hitting record that morning in the boardroom, but I must have. And what that voicemail captured? It changed everything. I moved slowly, almost cautiously, like I was afraid of what I might hear. My finger hovered above the mouse for a second longer, then I clicked. The audio wasn't long, just under 2 minutes. But it was enough. Bianca's voice came through first, crisp, carefree, cruel. "She really thinks she's still in the succession line?" She laughed. I shredded Grandpa's update the second he passed. Honestly, she should be thanking me. I saved her the embarrassment. There was a pause, the clinking of a cup on glass. Then our mother spoke, her tone sharp with amusement. "Well, she was always too soft. That's why you're CEO now, sweetheart. She doesn't have what it takes." Another laugh. Bianca again. She's still clinging to that last clause, as if it ever existed. I paused the recording. The room felt smaller than before, the walls pressing inward. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. The silence was heavy, not the comforting kind, but the type that wraps around your neck and waits. For years I'd questioned myself. Maybe I hadn't remembered the trust document right. Maybe Grandpa had never really planned to include me. Maybe I was the afterthought they always treated me as. But that clip, that careless, damning exchange, wasn't just gossip. It was proof. I opened my email, dug into the folder I'd marked unsorted, and typed in a search I hadn't thought of in months. Co-ownership clause. It popped up instantly, an email from Grandpa's assistant. Subject line, "For your eyes only," dated 5 weeks before the funeral. I clicked. There it was, outlined clearly in legal language, attached as a PDF, the final clause that was supposedly never signed, according to Bianca. It detailed a shared ownership structure, me and Bianca, co-stewards of the family business. With one condition: if either party obstructed the execution of the will, the other would retain full rights. I read that part again, then again. She hadn't just lied. She'd disqualified herself. My hands trembled. Not from fear, from something sharper. A slow-burning, clarifying fury, but then came the weight of the real dilemma. If I stayed quiet, they'd win. Again. They'd keep everything, the company, the legacy, my place in it. But if I came forward now with this recording and this clause, I'd be accused of tampering, of suddenly remembering things for my own gain. Worse, of trying to tear apart the business my grandfather built. Lose quietly or win ugly. Neither option tasted like victory. I closed my eyes. My mind, without invitation, wandered back to a summer when I was 12. Bianca had tripped in the driveway and bloodied her knee. I gave her my necklace, my favorite one, shaped like a tiny locket, because she cried and said she felt stupid. I forgave her the next day after she lost it, and the next time, when she lied about me skipping school, and the next time. I taught her how to lie, I whispered aloud, by forgiving her too fast. I sat with that truth for a while, let it ache. Then I opened a fresh page in my notepad and started writing. Not just ideas, strategy, timelines, Names, questions, who would benefit from silence? Who might be quietly rooting for the truth? One name came to mind, Mitchell, the board member who had texted earlier, the only one who hadn't avoided my gaze during the meeting. I picked up my phone. The screen had dimmed, but the message was still there. "Are you okay? Call me if you need to talk." M. I hit call. It rang twice before he answered. "Thalassa?" His voice was wary, but not cold. I took a breath. "How deep is your loyalty to this company?" There was a pause, a rustling, maybe of papers. "You have 5 minutes," he said. "Talk." I talked. I told him just enough, not everything, but the shape of it, the clause, the recording, the intent behind it all. When I finished, he was quiet. Finally, he said, "Send me what you have. I'll make sure it doesn't vanish." I thanked him, hung up, and got to work. First, I backed up the voicemail and the clause document to 2 separate drives. Then, I uploaded both to an encrypted folder under a dummy account I'd made years ago, back when I still believed digital security was just paranoia. As the files processed, I walked to the closet. In the back, past winter coats and unused scarves, was a long garment bag I hadn't touched since the last shareholders' retreat. I pulled it out, unzipped it slightly, and ran my fingers across the fabric. It still fit. I knew it would. "They wanted me to disappear," I said quietly, more to the night than to myself. "Let me show them what that really looks like." I zipped the bag closed, set it by the door, and went to bed with a different kind of silence, one that hummed with intention. The next morning, I walked into the shareholders' briefing, and the room went dead silent. I had arrived a full 10 minutes early, not because I was eager to impress, but because I needed every second to steady myself. The conference room buzzed with low murmurs and shifting papers, but the moment I stepped inside, wearing the navy suit Grandpa had tailored for me during my first year out of college, those whispers evaporated, eyes turned, postures straightened. Bianca was seated at the head table, legs crossed, sipping coffee with one hand while scrolling on her phone with the other. Her confidence didn't crack until she spotted the legal folder in my hand. Then her fingers froze mid-scroll. Mother was beside her, polished in pearls, with that practiced half-smile she wore like armor. She looked up, briefly met my eyes, then dismissed me with a blink. I walked past them both, not pausing, not flinching. I took the open seat 3 chairs down from Bianca, slid the folder onto the polished surface of the table, and folded my hands over it. After a few obligatory introductions and updates from the chairman, I raised my hand. "Before we proceed," I said clearly, "I'd like to formally request 5 minutes to address an ethical compliance concern. I believe it pertains directly to the integrity of this board." There was a hush. Bianca's head turned slightly, her jaw tightening. I didn't look at her. The chairman glanced toward legal counsel, then gave a hesitant nod. "5 minutes, Miss Thalassa. Please keep it concise." I gave him a single nod, reached into my coat pocket, and pulled out my phone. "I'd like to submit a recording for consideration," I said. "The content speaks for itself." I placed the phone in the center of the table, tapped the screen, and pressed play. Bianca's voice filled the room. "She really thinks she's still in the succession line?" I shredded Grandpa's update the second he passed. "Honestly, she should be thanking me. I saved her the embarrassment." Then Mother's voice followed, calm and cutting. "She was always too soft. That's why you're CEO now, sweetheart. She doesn't have what it takes." No one moved. The air thickened. A board member across from me dropped his pen. Someone on the left shifted in their chair, sharply sucking in a breath. No one said a word until the recording stopped. I reached forward and paused the playback. My fingers were steady. Bianca shot up from her seat, voice raised. "This is fake. You manipulated that file. Anybody can splice recordings these days." Mother stood too, hands clenched into fists. "She's always been jealous. From day one, always needed to be the victim." The legal counsel leaned forward. His voice was firm but even. The file metadata has been reviewed. It's original and traceable to the date it was received, also admissible under internal compliance protocol. Bianca turned toward him, her mouth open as if to argue, but nothing came out. Her jaw moved, but the words didn't land. Not this time. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. Instead, I opened the folder in front of me and held up a printed email, the very one I had buried months ago, thinking maybe I was just imagining it. This was sent to me by my grandfather's assistant, marked, "For your eyes only," dated 5 weeks before his passing. I slid it across the table toward the legal team. Attached to it, I continued, is the clause my sister claimed never existed, a co-ownership agreement between the two of us, pending no interference, which, based on the audio, is no longer in question. I reached into the folder again and took out one more document, a handwritten note on ivory stationery, signed in a looping, unmistakable hand. I held it up, steady as stone. "He left me this," I said. It was tucked into the back of his study desk, behind a photo of us on the pier. I cleared my throat and read aloud. "To Thalassa, stand tall when they try to bury you. They never realized you were the seed." No one interrupted. Then slowly, I reached into my bag and pulled out a vintage silver pen. I held it gently between my fingers, letting it catch the light. "He signed every document with this," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "And so will I." The chairman looked at me, then at Bianca, then back at me again. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded, with reckoning, with recognition, and with a quiet shift in the room's gravity. For the first time, I felt it. The weight of the room was no longer against me. I stood, carefully gathered my papers, and slipped the pen back into my pocket. Bianca shot up again, red-faced now. "You think this is over? You think you've won?" I didn't answer. I didn't even look back. But my hand tightened around the pen in my pocket. I kept walking, past the silent boardroom, past the judgment, past the chaos that had followed me for years. Let them scramble, let them spin. I wasn't walking away from the war, I was walking into the next move. That night, I got the email Bianca swore would destroy me. It came through just after 11 p.m., when the house had finally gone quiet and I was settling in to review a few documents from the ethics subcommittee. I almost didn't check. I wish I hadn't. The sender name was masked, but the subject line read, "You built this lie. Let's see if it burns." I opened it. There, lined up in polished, malicious order, were screenshots of what looked like financial records, wire transfers to offshore accounts I'd never seen, internal memos with my electronic signature, and even a fake message thread between me and a vendor who, according to the file, had paid me under the table for favorable contract access. It was amateur work to someone who knew what they were looking at, but to anyone on the outside, it looked damning. By morning, the file had been forwarded to the company's compliance office. An emergency ethics review was scheduled for that afternoon. No one called me. They didn't need to. Around 10 a.m., my phone buzzed with a single message from my mother. "We warned you not to overreach." I stared at the screen so long the display dimmed and went black. The quiet that followed wasn't peace. It was pressure. The kind that crushes from all sides without making a sound. I'd been here before. Years ago, when Bianca forged a recommendation letter and used my name to apply for a grant she didn't qualify for, I took the fall. I didn't say a word. Grandpa had asked me once why I didn't defend myself. I said, because no one would believe me anyway. He never brought it up again. But later that week, he gave me a thick, leather-bound ledger and said, "One day, you'll write your own record. Start here." Back in the present, my inbox was flooding. One of our board members, Harlan Kessler, who had always claimed to be above family drama, called for an immediate suspension of my role pending investigation. I knew Bianca had something on him, I just didn't know what. Whispers were already circulating. An influencer account with 20,000 followers posted a blurry version of the spreadsheet on their story with the caption, "Is Thalassa not as clean as she looks?" That afternoon, my nonprofit's biggest sponsor pulled out. No explanation, just a legal notice and a refund transfer. It hit like a blow to the chest, not because of the money, but because of the silence. No call, no check-in, just distance. By sunset, I was back in my apartment, door locked, blinds half closed, laptop screen glowing in the dimness. I sat on the floor, knees pulled up, staring at the bookshelf. Something about the uneven row of journals caught my eye. And then I saw it, Grandpa's old ledger. I'd kept it tucked away behind the law books and technical manuals. It looked almost untouched, except for the back flap, where the stitching had started to loosen. I pulled it down and opened the cover. Inside, the pages were filled with my own handwriting from my early 20s, notes, lessons, quotes from Grandpa. His words, my words, history in ink. I flipped to the last page. The leather backing felt slightly raised. Gently, I peeled it back. There, taped beneath the inner lining, was a small USB drive, worn, gray, with a faded label that simply read, "Play Me." I sat there for several seconds, just breathing. Then I plugged it into my laptop. A window popped up. One file, a video. I pressed play. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Grandpa sat in his study, the heavy oak desk behind him. He looked tired but alert, focused. His voice was steady. "If you're seeing this," he said, "then someone has tried to change what I left behind. They'll deny it. They'll pretend you imagined it. But you didn't. You never have." He reached for a stack of papers and held them up to the camera. "This is an addendum to my will. I didn't file it through the firm because I didn't trust anyone there after what happened with my brother's estate, but I had it notarized, time-stamped, and stored securely. In this document, I state clearly, if anyone tampers with the distribution of the family trust or suppresses the co-ownership clause, full control reverts to Thalassa." He leaned forward. "She has always been the one who saw through the noise. I trust her. I know who she is, and I know who the rest pretend to be." I couldn't move. The timestamp was 3 days before he passed. It was real, it was binding, and it was mine. I didn't rush, I didn't post, I didn't call anyone. I saved the file to a secure drive, backed it up twice, and sent it directly to the board with a brief, precise message. "I believe this answers your questions. I trust you know what this means." I didn't sign it with anything fancy, just my name. Then I shut the laptop and sat in the stillness. For the first time in days, I felt something break, but not inside me, around me. The illusion of their control was finally crumbling. I curled up on the couch that night with the silver pen in my hand. I hadn't even realized I'd been holding it since I pulled it from the blazer pocket that morning. Sometime past midnight, my phone buzzed, a single message from my mother. "Come to the estate, now." I didn't respond right away. I stood up, stretched, walked to the window, and looked out over the quiet street below. Then I turned back, walked to the desk, and picked up the silver pen from where I'd laid it down. I whispered, "Let's finish this." I walked through the doors of the estate, knowing this time I wouldn't leave empty-handed. My heels clicked across the marble floor, echoing in the silence. The scent of lemon oil and old leather drifted from the library where they were waiting. Inside, my mother sat upright in the same velvet armchair she always favored when she wanted to appear regal. Bianca lounged on the other side, legs crossed, arms folded, her eyes gleaming with that signature smugness. And between them, a family lawyer I recognized from years ago, Mr. Garvey, stood by the fireplace, his expression unreadable. My mother didn't even wait for me to sit. "You've shamed us," she said, her tone flat, her eyes colder than I remembered. Bianca tilted her head like she was waiting for a punchline. I set my bag down beside me and slowly pulled out a slim folder, placing it gently on the coffee table. Then I followed it with the small USB drive, the one I'd found tucked inside my grandfather's old ledger. I looked at them both and said quietly, "Do either of you recognize this?" Bianca's smirk faltered just a little. I nodded to Mr. Garvey. "Would you mind?" He plugged the drive into his laptop, and with a few keystrokes, the screen lit up. There was no dramatic music, no flashy transitions, just my grandfather's steady voice, echoing through the room like a ghost in full command of the living. "If anyone tampers with this inheritance," he began, "the full control reverts to Thalassa. I know who she is, and who the rest pretend to be." Time-stamped, clear, legal. Bianca's face drained of color. Her smirk collapsed into something close to panic. My mother's lips parted, but no sound came. When she finally found her voice, it was smaller than I had ever heard. He recorded this behind our backs?" I didn't answer. Mr. Garvey did. "This video predates the revised documents filed by the family. It is legally binding. The clause is now in effect. Bianca's transfers are void. Any assets diverted through her name revert to Thalassa as per the stipulation." Bianca bolted upright. "You can't be serious. That's not how this works. There's no way a video—" "It was registered," Garvey interrupted, holding up a notarized date certificate. "He filed it with me, privately. I have the original. It overrides the revisions you introduced, Bianca." She turned to our mother, sputtering, "Tell him to stop this. You're still on the board. Tell him this is ridiculous." But our mother didn't speak. She sat stiffly, her eyes fixed on a spot across the room. I watched her slowly open her purse and take out a pen. With deliberate motion, she signed the prepared documents Mr. Garvey had handed her, relinquishing her board seat, her title, her emeritus privileges. Silence fell again. Bianca slammed her hands down on the table. "This is betrayal. You're siding with her? After everything?" Our mother didn't even blink. "No one's siding with me," I said. "This isn't about sides anymore." Bianca stormed out, heels thundering through the halls. As the door shut behind her, I could already imagine the flashbulbs outside catching her disarray. And for once, I didn't feel a thing. The lawyer nodded to me. "It's done." I stood, gathered my things, and turned toward the bookshelves. My fingers found the old ledger again, the one my grandfather used to keep handwritten notes in. I opened it to the back flap where the USB had been, then closed it and placed it back exactly where it belonged. "He always said," I murmured, "legacy is what you leave in people, not papers." I left the room without another word. Hours later, back at my apartment, I opened a small wooden box from my desk drawer. Inside was a letter, folded carefully, addressed to Mom. I'd written it years ago, but never mailed it. It had traveled with me through 4 apartments and 2 job changes. It was a letter full of hope, apology, and confusion. But reading it now, it felt like someone else's voice. I unfolded the page, read it softly under my breath, then brought it to the sink. I struck a match. The paper curled inward as the flames licked the ink, the words disappearing into ash. "Some things you bury," I whispered, "not to forget, but to stop letting them bury you." Outside, dusk had turned the sky lavender and gold. I grabbed my coat and walked down to the beach where construction on the new design studio had just begun. It wasn't much yet, just scaffolding, outlines, and promise, but it was mine. I watched as 2 younger women stepped out of a truck, blueprint tubes in hand, laughing as they argued about flooring choices. They waved when they saw me. For the first time in years, I felt no urge to prove anything to anyone. I didn't win because I fought back louder. I won because I waited, listened, and knew exactly when to speak. So now it's your turn. Have you ever been pushed aside by the ones meant to protect you, only to rise higher without them? Tell me in the comments. I read every word.